Welcome to this live presentation on aspects of piano technique from my home in sunny Wimbledon. I'm going to be looking at a few things that we have on the online academy where we've just launched a new series on piano technique, and we started with elementary technique. Now, the point of the elementary technique, it's not just for piano teachers, it's not just for beginners. It's for those who may feel that they want a little bit of a health check with their playing, and you know, maybe they're suffering from tension. You're feeling a lot of tension in your playing. Tension is a very important thing to avoid. We don't want tension. We have to look at where tension comes from. It can happen in the body, of course, if we're playing with faulty technique, bad technique. Absolutely, it's physical. A lot of the time I'm noticing tension. Hi Cara, and Prithvi. Now, tension starts off up here in the brain, now in the mind rather. Why might that be? Anxiety. A lot of times people come to me and they're so anxious about playing the piano because they're thinking I'm going to be judging them negatively. There seems to be a lot of this in the piano teaching world, shaming people for not being able to do something, and I think it comes down to the very beginners. So if you are with a teacher who makes you feel bad about not being able to do something, simply leave that teacher and go to somebody who's going to be supportive of you. You need to feel supported in your piano journey. You need to be instructed, of course, but you need to be helped in a way that's encouraging, motivating, not dispiriting or shaming. So enough of that. What I've done, you won't be able to see this. I've got a few like buttons to that. Yeah, very, very important actually, the psychology of what we're doing. You might not be able to see, but I've turned my piano stool to portrait just as I had my phone, for the simple reason that I want to be able to swing my arm by my side. When I swing my arm by my side loosely and naturally, I form the perfect hand position for piano playing. There's no mystery about it. It's the natural position for the piano. And what I do is I'm going to swing my arm up and land in the keyboard. Now I've landed on my third finger on an E, and I notice when I do that that everything is in perfect alignment. I'm not dropping in the wrist, my fingers are not sticking up in the air. So this is the first exercise, and it may seem desperately simple, but for those that have tension, this might present some problems. So what we do is we swing our arm. If you've got a stool that will do this, it's a really nice thing to do. And I'm going to land on any given finger. Let me land on my fourth finger. And again, my angle for the fourth finger is just slightly different from landing in my third finger. What I've got is I've got my wrist and my forearm lined up behind the finger that's playing, or the fingers that are playing. Let me do that now, landing on 4 and 2. You see, it's so natural, and it's so, and yet not mysterious at all, and yet a lot of people struggle with this. Let me land on something that involves a black key. I should have swung, shouldn't I? Land on 5 and 2. And I'm ideally aligned for those two notes with that pair of fingers. Hi Maria, hi Katrina, Helen, nice to see you all. So that's the first exercise I would suggest doing. Simply swing and land. Now, if you've got this issue, which a lot of people do have, of fingers kind of curled up like this, you've got a tug of war in the hand. I see this a lot in my teaching. This is a very good exercise to do. So when you land in your key, just make sure that the other fingers are on the surface of their keys and not sticking up. And you might need to ask them very nicely. These are your servants. These fingers are your servants. Ask them very nicely if they would simply switch off. They don't need to do any work. They sit there without any kind of pulling tension. So I'm just literally balancing on the finger or the fingers that I'm holding down. That's really the very first thing. It's very important to have a piano stool that adjusts. So I have a pneumatic job here. I just pull on a lever and it goes up and down. The windy ones are also good. What you want to avoid is sitting on a cushion, because cushions do not give you the support you need. You need to feel the ischial bones, the sit bones in contact with a firm surface. So what we've got there, you may have noticed that my hand position when I bring my hand up is curved but not unnaturally curled up like this, because that creates tension. We're going to get into this a little bit later, because this is another issue with people have. If the fingers are flat, we can't really play with flat fingers. There is a kind of an exception to that. If we want a cantilena, you know, In other words, a broad singing line like that. What I do is I play on the pads of my fingers, but that's different from that. You can all try this. This is something you might want to try. Just put your hand in a normal playing position, that you will get from swinging your hand by the side. Bring the hand up and notice you've got this angle rather than this angle in the in the end knuckles here. So that's what I aim for. Now, when we get into the rotation business a little bit later, we're going to have to learn about adjustments in and out along the length of the key. But let's just go to the next thing now that I want to show you from the elementary technique module, which is how do we start off when we're wanting to check that we're aligned and loose and not tight. How do we start off when we're teaching beginners? Well, the last thing you want to do is to teach a beginner legato, which if you look at a lot of the early method books, the old-fashioned method books, tend to start that way. So what we do is we start off with whole arm, forearm actually drops, and I like a hand position which is not 5 fingers on the C, but maybe we could do, this is my trampoline exercise, and this is very good to start off with. I'm sensing my whole arm is involved. Do you see what goes there? And you can probably see my alignment. As I move up toward my pinky, my alignment shifts so that the arm is now behind that finger. Pinky here. And this feels really nice. And I could go on, I won't because it's a little boring to listen to. Another forearm bounce exercise that you can do. Hi Florence, hi Joshua, very nice to meet you. Joel, what happens when you're doing scales for something that takes your left hand to the right side of the keyboard? Oh, well, okay, let me get to that later. Again, the alignment there has to be different, doesn't it? If I'm playing my left hand here, my angle is different from here, but I'm still aligned, I'm not twisting round. So if we do need to address that, we simply move our body across. The torso, the balance can move so that I'm now balanced on my right sit bone rather than stretching like that or leaning unnaturally. So I'm aiming to preserve as much as is possible this straight line between the forearm. Now I was going to get onto this next exercise, which is, you know, from 1 and 5. All I'm doing is bouncing from thumb to pinky. I've taken the C major scale. If you want, you can bounce twice. This feels really nice, like being on a trampoline. And that exercise, you could use this as a warm-up exercise if you're a, you know, an elementary intermediate player. A very good thing to do. Why stop there? Let me do it now on a chromatic scale. This just, I think I'm out of view, aren't I, of the camera. But this is a very good exercise to practice. You can modify the notes that you play. Chromatic, you can even do it on an arpeggio. Fantastic for eye-hand coordination. You can do it with the same finger. And you notice there that there's no breaking in the wrist. I'm not flopping around in the wrist here. Okay, let me move on to, you know, the next thing that we'll need to do, which is to if we're teaching, you know, in the elementary stages, we'll need to learn legato. How do we broach legato? How do we approach legato? Hello, Lynn from North Wales, lovely place. The way I like to do this is between strung fingers, 2 strung fingers, 2 and 3, and via a slur, a drop roll slur. So I'm dropping into the first note. Let me just use, let me not use C major, let me use Dorian, just for the heck of it. Dropping into 2, really sensing that I'm connected to my key bed, and then when I'm ready to play 3, I come out of the keyboard with a slight movement toward the back here. Do you see how that works? Slightly to the back. Drop, roll. And again, you can apply this exercise. Here I would use a very gentle release in the wrist. I wouldn't drop down so that my wrist were broken in that direction, but I would certainly free up my wrist forwards. Again, how to do that? Well, so many different ways. I could simply go next door neighbours within the scale, or I could use the same note again, the same note I released from, or I could hop the octave, maybe over 3 different octaves. What that does is it fully engages the arm. So the arm is behind the hand. The hand is behind the fingers that are playing, rather than this kind of old-fashioned way of just locking everything and wiggling fingers. Right, so then from 2 to 3, let's try 3 to 4. You get the sense of what's going on here. Beautifully free movements. The arm and the fingers working together. Having done pairs of fingers, I could then move on to, what have I not done? 4 and 5, 1 and 2. 3 notes. And if I wanted, I could let my left hand join in symmetrical inversion. In other words, in contrary inversion. Once I get the hang of this. A very good thing to do. Hello Charlotte, also from Cardiff, and Alison from Norwich, Janet from Norwich too. Nice to meet you all. You know, there's no rules about where you go on your keyboard, but this idea is not only good for teaching, also very good for warming up if you want to start your practice feeling really loose. And as a kind of health check if you feel like you are suffering from tension. So the next thing we would do after having done the drop roll slurs from 2 note to 3 notes to 4 notes, then we've got 5 notes. And you may think, well, hang on a minute, isn't that just the 5-finger position that piano teachers seem to be so against? Well, what we're against is this approach to a 5-finger position. Do you notice there that I'm locking in my wrist? I don't know if you can see that approach. So if I'm going to do a 5-finger position, I can mobilize my wrist, and I'm letting the arm join with the fingers. So nothing in the finger without the arm, nothing in the arm without the finger. So this is a kind of a maxim that we live by. So let me move on now to the next heading, scales and arpeggios. I've done a whole module on scales and arpeggios. But since this is a technique session and not you know, learning about the form of scales and arpeggios, I'm just going to show you something really quickly that I think you'll find very useful. Oh, hi Daniel, watching from Australia. Thank you so much for your lovely comment. Yes, Kate, my keyboard is inverted. We had problems with the technology at the beginning of this. It was working perfectly fine half an hour before. John Venables, thank you so much for your comments, and Lachlan. So I'm going to show you very quickly the circular fifths as chords. I call these the scale chords. So I'm going to drop off my thumb and I'm going to use just 2, 3, 4, 5 in both hands. Right, and we're going to use the right hand for the upper tetrachord of C major and the left hand for the lower tetrachord of C major. So, and that's a really good way of teaching scales to beginners. But let me just show you how we can teach the circle of fifths to beginners. I'm going to remove my left hand and let my left hand take my right hand notes. I'm going to add a new tetrachord on the top. And my sharp is going to be under the 4th finger of my right hand. Now, because I'm running out of keyboard space on this, I'm going to do that again. Left hand, take the right hand release, and I'm going to add a tetrachord on the top, and my new sharp is under the 4th finger of my right hand. Now, if I carry on with that, let me just bring that down an octave. I've got to remember the sharps that I've already had, so I need to factor in the F sharp here. But my new sharp, G sharp, is under the 4th finger of my right hand. So that's easy to play a scale that way, 1 octave. I can get used to the shape of it, the sound of it, with no worries about thumb unders or anything like that to confuse me. Now, to get to the flats, I do it the other way. Going back to C, I let my right hand take my left hand tetrachord. The new flat, or the first flat in this instance, is going to be under the second finger of my left hand. There's F major. There's the scale chord. Now, if I carry on doing that, my second finger in my left hand is going to include, or going to be, the new flat. So this is a great way of learning the scales as chords. You'll soon get very, very comfortable with that, because a lot of times people complain that they've got technical problems with their scales. I had one chap come to me to do a grade 8, and he announced to me almost proudly, I've got technical problems with the scales, the harmonic minor scales that begin on black keys. Just, you know, please help me. So I asked him to play one, and sure enough, it was problematic, but it wasn't technical. I asked him, can you please play that scale with one finger? And he couldn't. Now, if you can't play with one finger, what does that mean? You haven't really understood the pattern of the notes. You haven't heard how the thing sounds. And until you've got a map of the terrain, how can you then add fingers to that? So we've got to know the scale by design, shape. Now, let's have a little look at the thumb in a scale, because this is problematic. If I play my scale with the thumb under approach, I'm going to show you the thumb under, and I'm going to talk about alternatives. The thumb under, it's probably easier if I show you this. The thumb under approach is very traditional. What we were taught to do, a lot of us, was this. When the second finger plays, start to move the thumb under. Now that's good. We do want to start to move the thumb under, but we don't want to be contorted like this with the thumb going immediately to the G, because that causes tension, and as we discovered earlier, tension is not good. We want to avoid tension. So it's even worse when we do the thing with the fourth finger at the end, this one. Let me make sure you can see. Now let me get my thumb under for the next C. Even worse, I've got to stretch it, I've got to sort of hoik it under my hand like this. We don't want that. So what we do want is to move the thumb gradually. So as I play my second finger, I establish a reflex for the thumb to release its note and start its journey. When I get to the third finger, the thumb is now behind the third finger. Do you see? Now what I would want to do, personally would want to do, is to rotate into the thumb. Can I show you what that looks like? So there's a rotation here. There, do you see? The thumb's moving under, it's now behind the fourth finger, which is fine, because I'm there, I'm balanced on 4, and I rotate into my thumb. So that becomes even more problematic when we get to an arpeggio. If you're going to do a thumb under approach to an arpeggio, which actually is perfectly viable if you've got a big enough hand. I've got a big enough hand. I can manage that with no problems. But if you haven't got a large enough hand, or if you don't like the feeling, I don't have any problem with that, because do you notice I'm giving a little bit of rotary assistance to that thumb under? But if let's say you can't manage that, or if you're a teacher, I certainly wouldn't suggest teaching it to a beginner. Something you can look at later. What I tend to favour is a throwing movement. Thank you so much for all your lovely comments. Don't forget to hit the wow buttons and the faces and all of those things that we've got on this. So what I would do is to throw my arm. And I've got an exercise that I use, which I call target practice, which is where I deliberately move my thumb down chromatically a note each time. So if I want to sense this free throw, why not use the black keys? Bored yet? Do you see how reliable it is? That's very reliable. It doesn't sound broken, does it? Because I'm not lifting up like this. I'm not lifting up and then dropping. I'm throwing, and just before I throw, there's a rotation, which really it's like a slingshot. You know, it's rubbery. It's elasticated. It feels really free, really easy, really nice under the hand. So that would be. you'll find a lot of demonstration videos in the Online Academy module for scales and arpeggios. Anything that I've forgotten to say? No, I think let's move on now to the forearm rotations, which again, this is a very big module in the Online Academy. I think we've got 40 videos there which you can look at one at a time. I had some lovely feedback from somebody the other day who said it's made a huge difference to his playing. Excuse me, I've got really bad hay fever at the moment. I don't know why. I think it's got something to do with the pollen. So I thought, because I had studied this forearm rotation with a student of Dorothy Taubman back in the 1980s, the person I was working with had been a student of hers and was giving me this information, and it completely changed my playing. And now I use it very, very much. I would like to say that I'm not a Taubman teacher. I have enormous respect for the Taubman teachers who specialize in this particular way of choreography. I use it just as I use other aspects that come to me from my great Russian tradition, which is again another part of my lineage. So let's go on to the forearm rotation a little bit now. We've probably all experienced it in things like, you know, Alberti basses. You know, this kind of motion in the left. Would you believe, sorry, that's too fast. Would you believe I'm also using it here? But that is much easier to see. This is much harder to comprehend. So I'll unpack it a little bit in a moment. But let me just show you how we could, if you've not got that motion in your body. Let's try something. This is a bit of a weird thing to do, isn't it, in a demonstration on piano playing, to close up the piano. Can you see my elbow is now anchored? That's the stable point. And I simply rotate my forearm from left to right. Twist. One of the most natural movements to the body. It's so free, it's so liberating. And if you notice what happens when I rotate here, the fingers are lifting, yes? But they're not lifting from here. They're being lifted by my forearm. And this is the important thing. This is the critical thing. That if we lift fingers like this, that's tiring. And it's not always very coordinated in the feeling. This we can do very freely, very, very quickly, with no tension at all. So the first thing would be to just sense the range of motion that we can make forwards and backwards. This is known as a pronation, and that's known as a supination. But if I took a pencil, I happen to have one sitting by piano, and I aim to hit the pencil with, first of all with my pinky and then with my thumb, I've equalized the range of motion, which is what we want to do. Then I apply that to the keyboard. Can you see how that would work on the keyboard now? I'm not lifting my fingers like this, they are being lifted by my forearm. Yes, apologies about the reverse keyboard, but as I mentioned a while back, we've had a little tech issues at the beginning of this, which I thought I had solved. I did actually solve the last time, but I apologize for this. So now let's have a little look at how we might install that if we're not used to it. I quite like to use the Mozart Trill exercise. Take your dominant hand. If you're right-handed, take your dominant hand. I'm trying to see a good place on the keyboard for this. I'm going to trill between 1 and 2. I'm very aware that my elbow is in one spot, and that my wrist is not breaking or bending. When I lift my fingers, they all come up together. Do you notice all the fingers are coming up at the same time? I'm not lifting just the second finger. I'm not even thinking of lifting the fingers, actually. Now 1, 3, 2, 3, 2, 4, 3, 4, 3, 5, 4, 5. Do you see how that works? And then I can come back the other way. So then 1, 3, 2, 3, 2, 4, 3, 4, 3, 5, 4, 5, 3, 5, 3, 4, and so on until I get back. Try that with combinations of blacks and whites. You could even do this. wouldn't start with a thumb on a black note though. Then if you want from there, you could go to the, which number is this? I'm not a fan of Hanon in the traditional ways. In other words, this high finger lifting stuff. But you probably know about medications that have been formulated for one thing and they turn out not to work for that thing, but they work for other things. So doctors prescribe them what they call off-label. So I'm using Hanon off-label, which means this. It means that I can use the Hanon pattern of number 6 with my rotary movements. Now, do you notice what I'm doing? When I put my thumb on the white key, I obviously need to be able to reach the white key with my thumb, but look where my long fingers are. They're right inside the black key area. So what I want to do is to come out so that my second, third, fourth fingers are not crowding. Now you may think, well, that looks very awkward and my teachers have told me not to do that. My teachers have told me to keep all my fingers on the keyboard. That's, I would venture to suggest, certainly a possibility for playing the piano. Now, we all play the piano in our own way. It belongs very much to the old school of, you know, keeping the fingers all the same length, but the fingers aren't the same length. And I find if I keep my fingers on the keyboard, I need to curl up these fingers, which causes tension. Then go in. That feels so easy and loose and free. And what was this? Speaking of medications, a pharmacist is here. LOL. Hi, Saad. Welcome. Off-label Hanon is what we're doing there. We're just simply using a pattern of notes. You know, they're innocuous in and of themselves. Here's an example that I have in the online academy. It's from, I forget who wrote this actually, I should know. I think it's Berence, or yeah, maybe. Now, the reason I put that in there is just to show you, oh, somebody liked it, okay, to show you the up, down, in, out movement, the choreography that we need. When I play this Alberti, I'm in one spot. When I play that Alberti, the dominant in its first inversion, if I kept my hand in the same position, I would need to twist round and cause tension. And any kind of twisting movement that we make here is likely to cause us tension, particularly if we keep the hand there. So, what I would suggest we need to do, or advocate, is to move inwards and upwards. And then back out again. To see how that works. So these in, out, up, down adjustments are absolutely vital to the rotary choreography. If we don't do them, we're going to have to curl up, which is what we don't want. Now, let me just get into the, we've got a little time left. Right, scales with rotations. This is slightly problematic because now, what we've been doing up to now has been using what's known as single rotations. And what we need to do now is to use double rotations. So single rotations are used for notes that go in the opposite direction, one from the other, or the fingers going in the opposite directions, trills. When I've got a scale, I've got a blend of, or a mixture of, singles and double rotations. Let me just explain what a double rotation is. It's when we want to move, let's say I've swung into my thumb, I make a preparatory movement to get into my thumb, which leads me to my second finger. Do you see how that works? That's kind of one motion, really. This to this, and that's known as a single rotation. With a preparatory movement, a swing in the opposite direction. And the singles, just to recap, the singles, if I make a single rotation from 2 to 3, think of it as a little bit like a rocking chair. So if you're in a rocking chair, you go a little bit further in that direction in order to get back. So you've got a kind of momentum building up here. So it is with the rotations on the trills. I don't stop when I get to the 3. I go a little bit further than I need in order to come back. So these are known as kind of preparatory movements to get you back to the... But those are organic. In other words, one leads to the other to the other. But when we want double rotations, what we need to do, here's the single, I need to stop before the double and just check that I'm not tilting over that way, or otherwise contorted. Now I make a small preliminary swing in that direction in order to land squarely in my 3rd finger. Do you see how that worked? There. So if I just show you that much so far, preparatory swing, single rotation, let me do that again. I stop there just to make sure I'm not tilting, then I make my preliminary swing and land in the 3. Now, if I want to then go to the thumb, which I will for a scale, do you see those single rotations around the thumb? This is where things can get a little bit convoluted, which is why I've got 40 videos in the module on the Online Academy. The thumb always rotates in the direction of the body. So for the right hand, it would be from... I'm very bad with my rights and lefts. I failed a driving test as a result of turning left when he told me to turn right. I have to think about it, from right to left, yeah? And the left hand, it will be from left to right. Okay, so what that means is that in a scale, this thumb is going to rotate that way, as all thumbs will. Now I need another double rotation here, another one here, and another one here. But that connects back to a single, double, 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 single, single. Now let's add to that the choreography that we're going to need. So come back out, come in, and added to the coming in and out, there's a slight adjustment upwards as well, downwards for the thumb. The thumb's going to be at the lowest point. Higher there. Now you may think, well, this looks very wobbly, and it's not at all. When it's fast and the movements become small, these things feel $1 million. They really are so natural to the body. It just feels effortless, you know. So that's all choreographed with rotations, both single and double. Let me just unpack that a little bit for you. The Mozart C major sonata that we were looking at a little earlier. Hello, James. Hi, okay, Maria. I can't understand Portuguese, I'm afraid. You'd have to put that into English for me. Right. I do know a few Portuguese words. Okay, so do you see there's my single? Some more singles. Doubles to a single. Double, 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 single, single. And now I go into the back of the keyboard because I need to put my short finger. Everybody's thumb is a short finger. Everybody's pinky is a short finger. I need to move further back. So where are we with all of this? I think we need to just look a little bit at maybe some choreography for other pieces, you know, that involves that in-out adjustment. I did something for the Online Academy, which is simply to take a few of the two-part inventions of Bach and have a look at how we might choreograph them with rotations, which is not to say that they can only be played with rotations, not at all. But I use those as examples of, because they're short and sweet and to the point, how we might think of mapping out the choreography. So with the D minor, did you notice how my preliminary swing was this way from left to right? Because I need to make two single rotations there. There's a couple of doubles. And do you notice how I'm going to the back of the keyboard there? And I can feel in those 3, 4, 5, when I play 2, 3, 4, 5, I can feel those rotations happening super fast. it feels like, how can I describe this? Like something that's rubberized, in other words, bouncy. I can feel the rebound. And when I get to the, do you see where my arm is now, where my position is now? I'm at the back of my keyboard to the extent that my thumb and my fifth finger can balance on thumb and five. That's really important, otherwise I'm going to be twisting around or feeling weak or flattening out the fingers like this. So, you know, when you're thinking about rotary movements, we really have to map them together with the adjustments up, down, in, out. It kind of goes together. I would suggest, and do suggest in the Online Academy, starting off with very step by step by step. Oh, somebody's asked a question. Janet, how do you get from E to F in the C major scale without your elbow coming out and still keep it legato? Very good point. Let me just dwell on that for a moment. Do you see the rotation from, this is good to practice. Try this on the back of your hand. Take 1 and 3 and just rotate freely between 1 and 3. You should feel natural. Notice my elbow is in one stable place. I'm not dropping, or that's really important that this is stable. Okay, now put the thumb under the third finger and make the same movement. And if you're not sure, go back to this. Now put the thumb under. That's the counterintuitive part. And I can remember when I was shown this, it sort of did my head in for a bit. I couldn't quite, okay, he was telling me to, I could see him do it, but I wanted to go the other way until I got it. And once you've got, it's like riding a bicycle. Once you've got it, you've got it. You can never not, you can never forget how to ride a bicycle, I don't think. So do you see what happens here? 1, 3, 1, 3, and then 1, 3, 1, 3. So this is the thing. I've got some exercises for this in the module, but you know, just try this. See how that, there's no dropping down of the elbow. This is where people go wrong with the rotations. They do this sort of thing. Let's see if I can do it. I can't really do it. That sort of thing, which is fatal. It's like riding a bicycle with a, you know, a wobbly axle. The wheel's not going to work. You'll fall off. So this has to be the stable point here. So now we've got just a few minutes left. What I think I could do is just to wrap up a few, maybe wrap things up a little bit with some review here. So if you look at how the rotations work, the second finger, third finger and fourth finger can rotate either from left to right or from right to left, depending on the context. You see how that works? My second finger is now going from left to right and right to left. You get the idea here? The thumb always rotates this way toward the body. The pinky always rotates in the other direction when it's playing by itself, but not when it's playing chords. So if we want to, you know, play a chord stream, let's say, with rotary adjustments, and you might choose not to use rotary adjustments. You know, you might choose to make that more from the wrist. You know, personally, I don't like the way that feels. I prefer to use forearm movements if I can. Bounces here, very, very close. But let's say you wanted to make a jump from this position to that position. You can make jumps also rotary. Do you see what's happening here? When I'm going to move from this position to that position. Do I lift and drop? Could do. Nothing wrong with doing that. But you know, some jumps, I can remember as a student having struggles with the B flat minor Chopin sonata, which had all these huge great jumps, and no matter how much I practiced them, funnily enough, I haven't practiced it for years, and here it is coming out okay, but that's sod's law, isn't it? But I do remember when I applied the rotations to those jumps, they suddenly yielded. And the way that it works is this. Let me come back to the triad for a moment. The pinky leaves the keyboard last. So what I'm doing is I'm hinging over the pinky like that and landing, which stops me having to lift like this. See, if I lift like that, I'm using a lot of extra energy, wasting. But whereas this, I can flip and untwist my arm and then land. It's very, very free, really free. So I don't think you can see the top of my keyboard. So when I release this chord, my pinky comes up last. When I release here, my thumb comes up last. And my thumb, let me just see if I can feel it. Do you see how that works? And then I land this way, rather than this, a series of kind of jackhammer, or what do we call that in England when you dig up a street? Pneumatic drill, you know, that kind of thing. So just to recap here, we can use rotations for passages that maybe we've been struggling with, for power, for strength, for speed. We always sort of end up getting tight and tired. We can use them for jumps. So just another one came to mind. See how I rotate from the 4 to the 1. There's kind of no end to how you can apply the rotary motions, but it's a very, very specific thing. It's not just a question of wiggling your forearm around a little bit. It's very, very specific, and it's quite complex. I do have to say it's complex. Once it becomes second nature, which it will after a bit, provided you do it well and do it correctly, you'll find it's a fantastic way of feeling coordinated, liberated, strong, and loose at the keyboard. So Ryan is putting the details here. The modules are available on the Online Academy. There's a link there. So Lawrence asked, do you do rotation and switch the weight without the wrist? How do you do the rotation and switch the weight without the wrist collapsing? Well, the wrist is just a stable joint there. You don't need to, any collapse there is going to slow you down. It's counterproductive to do anything with the wrist there. So you don't move the wrist when you're making the rotary movements. Now, of course, the wrist, this is another thing. People call it wrist rotation. If you think about it, if I block the wrist here, my wrist can't rotate, can it? I mean, maybe a millimeter. It's the forearm that's doing the rotations, but people map it from the wrist. Because they see the wrist rotating like this. So it can be called wrist rotations. I mean, it's just a word term, isn't it? But the wrist itself is not breaking here. That's the important thing. Now, of course, we use, personally, I would not use wrist in this way in other situations. When I want a beautiful legato cantabile melodic line, absolutely want to go through the wrist. And there are other times when I would not want to go through the wrist. I'd want the wrist to be part of my arm. You know, I never use the word firm. Firm is good. Rigid, no, wouldn't use that word. Firm, just connected to the arm, as if you were carrying a plate of a bowl of fruit or something. Your wrist would not be flopping around. You'd drop the thing. Any other questions before? Yes, Rudolph says, can we talk about flat fingers versus curved? Well, if you think about the natural curve in the hand, what we can do is just to flatten it out slightly, and then we're able to draw on the arm. So what happens there is the arm can go through the pad of the finger, or the cushion of the finger, through to the key bed, and that it's almost like we're breathing in the wrist. It feels, again, beautifully like the singer's breath, and that enables me to cling to my key and create sounds for connected cantilena style lines, you know, melodic lines, where we want this freedom in the wrist. So sometimes we want the wrist to be very free and never, I don't like floppy wrists, but free. Other times we want them to be, the wrist can be springy. Other times the wrist just needs to be connected to the arm. And it's a question of just classifying these different ways of moving, so we know what we're doing. For example, we can't mix up wrist circles. I come to this example quite often. You know, here, there, I'm moving here, but I could move just like this. You know, there are various different ways of doing it. That question disappeared. Okay, Callum, how much of a problem is it when your fifth finger sticks up a little when playing passages? You know what? This is a really good question. I saw, I'm not going to mention any names, but I saw a pianist at the top of his profession from the proms, I think it was last year, it could be the year before, who absolutely curled up the pinky here, and I just had to, you know, if I were a piano teacher, well, I am a piano teacher, but if somebody like that came to me for advice and was having problems, the first job I would do would be to unlock that and get that pinky so that it was not retracting up here, because I think that is bound to cause tension, and it's bound to lead eventually to injury. So I would address that question, but there was a very great pianist doing that thing. So, you know, I don't think there's a black and white solution to this. So I think it is a problem when the pinky sticks up, because what you get is you've got potentially a tug of war going on. You know, this finger coming up that way, the other finger's wanted to come down. So not a good thing to leave unaddressed. What musical genres other than classical do you play, says Sud? Well, I'm a bit boring in that sense. I'm a classical pianist. I wish I could play jazz. I really admire people who play jazz. I don't play jazz. Okay, so Lawrence asks or mentions dystonia affects a lot of pianists, including Gould and Turek. Yes, so absolutely. I didn't realise that Turek had dystonia. But anybody that uses their body, you know, in the same, I wouldn't say narrow way, but it is a kind of narrow way. If you're practicing hours and hours and hours a day, these health injuries can happen. In the UK, and I'm sure other countries have got resources, we have the BAPAM, British Association for Performing Arts Medicine, I think, BAPAM. Fantastic what BAPAM is doing, the work that BAPAM is doing to rehabilitate injured musicians. Do look them up on the website. I think that, looking at the time, we're supposed to stop now. Unless anybody's got any other questions, I will sign off and wish you a very good day and a happy weekend. Okay, thank you, Saad. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you on here, and apologies for the problems with the technology, which I thought I had corrected. I did actually correct last time, so why my iPhone has decided to play tricks on me today, I don't know. But anyway, thank you so much for being part of this. Charlotte, thank you so much for your comment, and have a great weekend, and hopefully I'll catch you at some point in the future. Bye for now.